Hello, everyone. Hi. Thank you all for joining us today. Let me introduce myself. I'm María del Carmen Paoloni, head of the teacher training course at Instituto Superior de Formación Docente número 3, Dr. Julio César Avanza in Bahía Blanca. Today, on the occasion of our institute's 70th birthday anniversary, our teacher training course and the Association of Teachers of English in Bahía Blanca, APIB, are very glad to present this talk about functional grammar, delivered by one of our teachers, María Noemí Ávila. We hope that you enjoy it. Let me remind you that you can write your questions or comments during the talk in the YouTube chat window. So, without further delay, please welcome our moderators today, both members of APIB, teachers Karina Useltinger, also one of our teachers here, and Fernanda Montefiore. Thank you very much.
Hello. APIB is the Asociación de Profesores de Inglés de Bahía Blanca. As a non-profit organization, it has assisted teachers of English in Bahía Blanca and the neighboring area for over 40 years. During this period, it has helped its members in their professional development, sharing experiences with national and international professionals in conferences held all over the country. At present, the association is working hard with different members of the community to communicate pedagogical experiences that have had an impact on teachers' practice in pandemic times.
On behalf of APIB, we want to welcome María Noemí Ávila and congratulate the Instituto Superior de Formación Docente número 3, Julio César Avanza, on its 70th birthday anniversary.
So Noemí, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello everyone. Well, we're going to start. There was a little delay. I'm going to say it was my fault because I had some technical problems with my computer. Today, we're going to see how systemic functional grammar can help us, can help students and also us teachers in order to improve our writing skills. But first, let's see what systemic functional grammar is. Systemic functional grammar is a kind of grammar that is different from the traditional grammar, from the structuralist grammars that we are generally familiar with. And why is it that it is different? Because for functional grammar, what matters is not correct structures. That is to say, it is not a prescriptive grammar. It is a grammar of usage. So, as the word says, functional grammar, this grammar focuses on the functions that languages are meant to perform for people to use those functions in order to communicate appropriately. Now, another difference in this kind of grammar is that it includes work on semantics, that in general, traditional grammars do not include semantics. Semantics is an area that is generally disregarded. But functional grammar includes semantics because it is part of the grammar and it is part of, it is a resource that we use in order to communicate effectively. To know the correct meaning of a word, or the precise, not correct, sorry. The precise meaning of a word helps us in the choice of vocabulary that we make in order to communicate. Functional grammar includes, I mean, it's very much used in the analysis of both written and oral discourse That's why for functional grammar, we don't speak of sentences, we speak of the clause. Remember that the word sentence is associated with written discourse, and functional grammar goes beyond it, incorporates also the analysis of oral discourse. We are going to be focusing today on written discourse and how is it that the different levels of analysis that systemic functional grammar proposes are going to help people write, improve their writing skills. And it creates a certain awareness on language that is very important for people to communicate effectively, because that is what Halliday said, that an awareness of the resources that the language gives us is going to help us communicate better and be able to communicate what the speaker or the writer really needs or wants. Okay, that is briefly an introduction of what systemic functional grammar is. Then I'm going to focus on the different levels of analysis. I'm going to mention them briefly here because the idea today is to focus on the areas that are going to be helpful for us to for the writing skills. We're not going to cover all the postulates of systemic functional grammar because we have restricted time available. So the levels of analysis that are performed in systemic functional grammar are register theory, genre theory, and then the metafunctions. The metafunctions we're going to see, I'm going to use another classification, not exactly Halliday's classification of the metafunctions, because I'm not going to cover the part of logical metafunctions in depth today because of the restriction of time, yes? But we're going to focus on the other metafunctions. Let's start with register. Now, what is register? Register theory includes field, tenor, and mode. Now, what is the field of a text? Of course, when I say text, I'm speaking of both written or oral discourse, yes? Again, today we're going to concentrate on written discourse. The field is the topic, is what the text is about. And why is it important for students to pay attention to the topic and to focus on the topic? Because when you are writing, you have to bear in mind what your topic is in order not to go off the topic. That is something that frequently happens when students are writing. The topic, well, there are many resources in order to identify what the topic is. But if we position ourselves as a writer, the topic is what, for example, in the case of students, what the teacher asked you to write about. Then the tenor. What is the tenor? The tenor are the participants in the communicative act. Who are the participants? The writer, of course. And in general, what students have to do of writing, they are reading. That's why I generally ask my students to think of a prospective audience, to think of a possible audience that will be reading their text. When I say possible audience, is because that audience is not real. But why is this important? Because it helps students focus. Suppose that you are given the topic, you are expected to write an essay on teenagers and technology. if you think of the audience as teenagers, you're going to include different topics. I mean, you're going to have a different development in your essay from the development that you're going to have if your audience is parents of those teenagers that are all day long with technological devices. I hope that you see what I mean. It is very important to focus and to think of someone concrete, even though that someone concrete is in existence, yes, but to think of someone who would be the prospective reader of your essay or of your piece of writing. I'm thinking of essay because in general, what poses most difficulties for students are essays. Then in the tenor, what is included, I mean, what is also included is the relationship between the participants. And of course, if you think of academic writing, that relationship is a formal relationship. So what happens if you think of formal relationship? There are certain conventions that are to be followed when you are doing academic writing and when you are writing something formally. It is not the same to write a text message, for example, to a friend than to write a text message to a teacher. There are certain conventions that you have to follow, and that in general, in our mother tongue, we do that unconsciously. But in a foreign language, we have to think twice about what to include and what not to include, how we are going to be expressing ourselves, how to avoid being pushy, how to avoid being authoritarian, for example, depending on who you are speaking with, okay? In the case of writing, we are focusing on academic writing. In the case of academic writing, the piece of writing is always formal. And then the mode. The mode is either written or oral. It may be, I mean, there are certain variations. In the case of, for example, of political speeches, written to be read, written to be explained. There are different possibilities. But in the case of our concern today, where the mode is going to be written. Okay? Well, now let's go to the next area, that is genre. And genre, I suppose that you are familiar with this because we have different genres. I mean, the genre is a way of classifying different elements, yes? We have genres in movies, we have genres in music, and we also have genres in academic writing. In writing, the genre, there is not one classification of genre. But for example, if we take essay writing, we can say that the genre is essay writing. Another genre may be narrative writing. But we can have academic writing as a genre, and inside that genre, we may have subgenres that would be narrative writing, essay writing, I don't know, argumentative writing, political speech writing. But we're going to focus today on, for example, essay writing. The genre for essay writing is essay writing, but inside that genre, we have different subgenres. One may be, for example, argumentative essays. Another may be essays developed by examples. Another may be essays developed by classification, essays developed by comparison and contrast. And why is this important? because each one has got its format. Each one has got its specific format that we need to know in order to fulfill the requirements of that format when we are doing a piece of writing. Okay? Why is it that I wrote here register plus purpose? Because the register is the topic, the participants, and the mode written is part of the genre plus the purpose. What is our purpose in the communicative act? What is it that we want to do? If we speak about argumentative essays, our purpose is going to be different from a comparison and contrast essay, or from a narrative essay, or from a descriptive essay. And all these elements have to be taken into account when we do a piece of writing. We have to fulfill the requirements of the format, but we need to have a clear purpose in mind. And why is it that we need to have a clear purpose in mind? Because when you don't have a clear purpose, you may go off the topic or may include information that is not relevant to your development. And most importantly, if you don't have a clear purpose, you are going to have problems writing your conclusion. Because the conclusion is where the purpose of our piece of writing is evident and clear. If we are asking people to do something, we are calling people for action, that purpose must be clear in the conclusion. If we are just describing, that purpose must be clear in the conclusion. But even though we may think that we are just describing, we are describing for a purpose. When we do a comparison and contrast, for example, you compare and contrast for a purpose. If you compare and contrast, for example, summer holidays and winter holidays, you're going to do that for a purpose. Either the purpose to persuade or to show a friend of yours that it is better to go on holidays in winter than to go on holidays in summer, for example, yes? But the purpose must be clear in mind before people start writing, because the purpose is what guides the writing. Okay. Now let's go to the meta functions. Now, what are the meta functions? The meta functions are different levels of analysis that Halliday proposes in order to approach texts, to analyze texts, and also the meta functions give us resources in order to use in any kind of communicative act. The first one, the order is the order that I chose, but it is not that this is the first one. But the first one that we're going to be seeing is the interpersonal meta function. As the word says, the interpersonal meta function is a meta function that we use in order to exchange either information or goods and services with other people. Interpersonal because it gives us tools to interact with other people. It gives us tools to communicate with other people, both orally or in a written discourse. Yes? Now, Halliday says that when we communicate, we do it for different purposes. To give or demand information, or to give and demand goods, to give or demand goods and services. When we say information is, for example, when we demand information is the case when we ask the question, for example. If we say, what time is it? We are demanding information. When we give information is when we, for example, explain a topic. When we, for example, tell someone, hurry up, it's late. We are giving information. It's late is information that we are giving to another person. In the case of goods and services, we can give goods and services, specifically the case when people offer to do something for another person. If we see someone who is having difficulties in doing an exercise, you can say, I'll give you a hand. Yes, that is to give some kind of service. Or, for example, if you offer a person have another piece of cake, yes, we're giving a kind of good. And we can also demand goods and services. This is specifically the case in which we ask someone to do something for you. Can you help me do this? Can you help me do this? Can you help me do that? Can you pass me the salt, suppose? Can you pass me the book? So why is this important? It is important because when we are writing, we are giving information. And it is important to take into account what kind of information we're going to be giving, how we are going to be giving that information. Of course, the interpersonal metafunction has got other elements that I did not include today, again, because of the time limit that we have. But I chose to include the part of modalization and modulation. And this is a way in which modals are classified by Halliday or by systemic functional grammar. And the modals that we use in order to exchange information are called modalization, and the modals which we use in order to exchange goods and services are called modulation. In the typical writing that students do, except if it is an argumentative writing in defense of, for example, abortion, you may use modulation in the conclusion in order to demand the government to pass a law or demand young people to do something or to take some kind of action. But modulation is not typical of academic writing, with certain exceptions, of course. What is typical of academic writing is modalization, because in academic writing in general, what the writings that students do during their courses of study in general include the writing of essays or of in general argumentative, comparison and contrast, any kind of essay. And here it is important to focus on the use of modalization. I'm going to give you one example, because it is not that there is a list of modals that indicate modalization and a list of modals that indicate modulation. You know that sometimes there is a kind of overlapping between them. And for example, must can be used to exchange information or to exchange goods and services. Because when I say, for example, There must have been problems in the service of internet because so and so. So there you are indicating the level of certainty that you have as regards the piece of information that you are giving. And in this case, we speak of modalization. But must can also be used to indicate modulation. For example, when you say, again, let's take the case of an argumentative essay. Something must be done in order to change the situation. There you are demanding action. So there must indicates modulation. The same happens with could, with should, but well, we're not going to perform an analysis of modals today. Okay, that is as regards the interpersonal metafunction. Something else that I would like to say, even though I didn't include, but I think is important. Also, the interpersonal metafunction also includes the mood that we use in order to communicate, the indicative, the imperative, and all that. In general, when you are doing a piece of writing, you use the indicative. Yes, affirmative and interrogative are the most frequent ones. Again, imperative can be in the case of an argumentative essay when you are asking people to do something. Can also be in a certain kind of essay. Suppose could be in a comparison and contrast, the example that I gave before. If you want to give some advice on a certain topic, for example, the example that I gave you about going on holidays in winter or in summer, then, but only in the conclusion. Yes, the use of modulation is let's say, admitted in the conclusion, not in the development. Remember that in the development, we have to sound objective and distant, even though we are not objective, but because we are never objective when we write, but at least we have to sound objective, yes? Sometimes, depending on the kind of information, especially when with certain topics that you don't want to offend some part of the audience, let's say, you may use modalization in order not to sound so unknowing. Yes, when you are giving, for example, a cause and effect, the effect of, I don't know, the effect of economic changes, for example, economic measures. If you don't want to sound too all-knowing, you may say, this maybe, could be, it can be associated to kind of downtoning what you are saying. That is a very much used resource. Okay, let's go to the experiential metafunction, one of my favorite metafunctions. The experiential metafunction is the one that analyzes processes, that the center of the analysis of the experiential metafunction is the process. What is the process? The process is the verb. Halliday gives a classification of processes because around the process, we identify different participants. We forget about the performer of the action. It is not that there is a single performer. There are different performers of actions depending on the process that we are using. Briefly, I'm going to mention the processes The material processes are the processes that indicate action. In the case of the material processes, the performer of the action is called the actor. The actor, the one that acts, the one that does something. Then we have the mental processes, the ones that probably students use most when they write essays. Mental processes are classified into 4 subcategories: mental emotive, that is the processes that are associated with emotions. For example, love, hate, detest, enjoy. Mental cognitive, the ones that are associated with processes of the mind, understand, believe. Mental desiderative are the ones that are associated with hopes, the typical want, hope. The ones that in general are our hopes for the future, that some situation changes. And mental, what did I say? Emotive, desiderative, cognitive, and, well, I have a blank here. The one of the feel of the senses. Well, I will remember. In the case of essay writing, in general, if you as writer want to sound objective and rational, you have to use mental cognitive processes. Yes. If you want to sound emotive, I mean, if you want to show emotions, you're going to be using mental emotive. For example, one thing is to say, I feel that some changes are necessary in order to improve a certain situation. And another thing is to say, I believe that certain changes are necessary in order to improve a certain situation. There is a great difference in what you communicate by the choice of these processes. These are the ones that are most important in any piece of writing. What is it that you want to show? Do you want to show emotion? Do you want that the audience feels that you have a certain emotion, or do you want to sound rational? If you want to, in general, if you are writing an argumentative essay, you need to sound rational and not emotive, because if you sound emotive, you may create a reaction in the audience, especially in the audience that does not agree with your idea. So it is very important that you sound rational, you use mental cognition, yes, or you take a distance. You don't get involved in what you are saying. In general, again, it is important not to include oneself when we are writing in the developing paragraphs of our piece of writing, but we can include ourselves, and we must include ourselves in certain cases, in the conclusion. Yes? In the conclusion, you need to be present. Even though you don't say, I feel, I believe, yes? Even though you don't include yourself as the writer, but you convey that idea, yes, in your audience. Okay. That is, I got lost. Mental processes. Then we have verbal processes. Verbal processes are the ones that those are easily identifiable because they are the typical verbs say, tell, and all the verbs that we use in other verbs of reporting, suggest, advise, etc. We choose to use those processes in order to convey a certain meaning, in order to avoid indirect speech. Sometimes we choose to use suggest, advise, threaten, etc. In the case of the verbal processes, the main participant, the performer of the action is the sayer. Then we have the relational processes. Relational processes, typically with the verb to be, typical of descriptions. Relational processes can be classified as attributive or identifying. Attributive is when we are qualifying, yes? And identifying is when we are identifying someone, someone or something, okay? Well, I'm not going to get into the participants because here it gets a little more complex. Then other processes that Halliday considers that are not so important are behavioral processes and existential processes. Behavioral are all the processes associated with typical human actions. For example, let's say he coughed, he sneezed. They say it is typically human actions, but in general, animals are also included in this in these processes. In general, especially nowadays, that animals are so humanized, but are not very very useful for academic writing. These processes, except in a narrative that you may be using some one or the other. The participant is the behavior. And in the case of existential, the typical cases with there is, there are, there was, there were. As you have seen, the identification of the process is very important, because once we identify the process, we identify the participant as someone who is feeling, as someone who is being rational and thinking, as someone who is saying, as someone who is behaving. I always say that the experiential metafunction is the function, the metafunction in which semantics plays a very important role, because we need, in order to identify the process, we need to be precise in the identification of the meaning of that process in the context, because the context in functional grammar plays a very important role. The context sometimes changes the meaning. And we see that, for example, in certain cases, there are certain verbs that we typically associate with a certain meaning, but depending on the context, we can interpret the meaning of that verb differently. For example, the verb see, we usually associate it with mental perception. It is a generally mental perceptive verb. I can see, I can see something, generally associated with the modal can. But we can say, for example, I'm seeing my teacher tomorrow. And in that case, in that context, see is a material process, because I see means I'm seeing my teacher, means I am meeting my teacher tomorrow. And we can also say, for example, let's imagine the situation in which someone explains you something, and after the person explains something, you say, oh yes, now I see. And that see means understand. So that see is a mental cognitive process. Yes. So when we are analyzing a text, or when we want to use a certain process in order to express a certain idea, it is very important to check the meaning of that process in the context in which we intend to use it, to see if it is the exact meaning that we want to convey. Because sometimes, as a teacher, I can tell you that sometimes I am correcting, I'm reading an essay, and I don't understand what the student means. And it is because the word that has been used is probably, I mean, it has probably got the meaning that the student wanted to convey, but it is not correctly used in that context. So I always advise students to check meaning in the dictionary when they are using vocabulary. In general, that is, I suppose that it is the result of the consequence of what we teachers have always said. Do not look up every single word in the dictionary. You have to understand meaning from context, and students have taken that too much to heart. And so they say, no, if they interpret the meaning, I have to interpret the meaning from context. I don't need to go to the dictionary. This means something like, and that's something like probably it is good for interpreting, sometimes not so good, because it leads to misunderstandings. But that something like is really dangerous when you want to produce a text, when you want to write and communicate something effectively. Well, another area, but this area is kind of peripheric, is circumstances. That is the case, I mean, the adjuncts that appear in the clause. Not always present, but sometimes they are present, and Halliday has got a special classification of circumstances. But the central point that is going to be useful for you as writers are the processes and the participants. How even if you are not including or involving yourself in the piece of writing, when you include people, when you say people feel, people think, okay, it's very important to make a decision as regards what position are going to be given to those participants in the piece of writing. Good. Let's go to the next one. I don't know how we are doing with time, but I think that we are short of time. The textual metafunction, one of the fundamental metafunctions as regards writing. The textual metafunction is the metafunction that analyzes theme and rhyme. What is theme is the starting point of the clause, and rhyme is the rest. Why is it important? Because of what we call thematic development. The theme is the topic that you are writing about. If the topic I gave before is teenagers and technology, that is the theme. Yes, that should be the theme, the starting point of the thesis statement, and also of the topic sentences of each paragraph. In general, the topic sentences, but for certain, the thesis statement. So the theme is what gives an idea to the audience as regards what the text is about. I don't know if you know this resource, but we generally do when we are looking for information in a long text. We generally have a look at the topics, at the topic sentence of each paragraph. And the theme of that topic sentence gives us an idea of what that paragraph is about. And that must be so in all written pieces. The theme is the starting point, but the rhyme is what follows, what Halide says, the rest. But why is the rhyme important? Because sometimes we start from one point and then we introduce, I don't know if you're familiar with given and new information. The theme would be the given, the rhyme would be the new information, but that rhyme can turn into the theme of the following clause. Yes, and this is important for the thematic development, and theme and rhyme and given and new are what make the text flow and what make the text easy to be followed by the reader. When we say that when I said that the theme is the starting point, or must be the topic in the thesis statement, in general, we take the topic from the title. We give a title to our piece of writing, and we take that title as theme of our thesis statement, so that the readers know what that piece of writing is going to be about. And then cohesion. Cohesion is very important because it's what gives the text the connection. Cohesive elements are the ones that make the text flow. Sometimes when you write, you say, for example, suppose the news were shocking, and if the news hadn't been mentioned before, we don't have a clear reference that precedes what we have said, and so the reader says, oh, what news? What is he speaking about? Yes, so I'm not going to get into detail, but I suppose that most of you are familiar with cohesion. That includes reference, that includes repetition. Then we have lexical cohesion, synonymy, antonymy. Well, those are all resources that we have at hand in order to make our text cohesive and coherent. And well, the last one, I suppose that we are in time. Something else about cohesion. In cohesion, we also include, apart from reference, that is the most common, we include the part of ellipsis and substitution. We have certain elements that we can use in order to avoid repetition, and that is ellipsis. For example, when we omit the pronoun in the case of a compound sentence. For example, she got up and went to the kitchen. We omitted the repetition of she, yes, and that also adds cohesion to the text, because the over repetition of certain elements in a text make the text confusing, yes, and hard to follow by the reader. We can have ellipsis, or we can have substitution, as I said before. In the case of substitution, we substitute a certain element, that is to say, For example, sometimes we use did in order to not to repeat a process or a verb that you have said before. Those are all resources that help the text flow. So it is not only theme, but also cohesion and semantic development. And you always have to bear in mind that you need your text to flow so that the reader understands the message that you are trying to communicate. Yes, it is important that you communicate what you want clearly and effectively. And for that, systemic functional grammar gives you, I hope, and I am convinced that systemic functional grammar gives you all the necessary tools. I included at the end, and this is the last that I'm going to mention, the logical metafunction. I'm going to say something that as regards Halliday doesn't, Halliday fused the logical and the experiential into the ideational metafunction. I chose to separate it because some other writers classify it as logical metafunction and make a distinction because sometimes when you are facing the theory for the first time, it is really hard to understand that fusion, yes, because it includes many other elements. What the logical metafunction includes is the metaphorical use of language. All the metaphors that we use when we speak and when we write. And we use more metaphors than we are aware of. In general, our written production in general, our written productions make use of metaphors without our being aware of that, yes? When we speak, of course, we use lots of metaphors, but we have been using them for such a long time that we are not aware that we are using language metaphorically. And well, in the case of the logical metaphor, the only one that I'm going to mention is the grammatical metaphor that is also called nominalization. And that is when we present the information as fact, as a fact. What is nominalization? Nominalization is when we turn a process into a noun group. And why is it that we do so? We do so in order to present the information as a fact, not to be questioned. And that is something that is very much used in scientific discourse, but is also in political speeches. When politicians do not want the information that they are given to be questioned, they nominalize. I'm going to give you just one example. If I say, for example, they met yesterday. They met at Congress yesterday. What happens if I use a process? That process can be negated because I know they didn't meet. But if you want that information not to be questioned, you say, their meeting at Congress yesterday was successful. And in that case, what they can negate is the possibility of it having been successful or not, but not their meeting. Yes? Okay, well, I think that's all. I don't know how we are doing with time, the moderators. Am I okay with time?
We're okay. It's 7:05.
Okay, up to when were we expected?
We started late, so let's ask some questions.
So.
We have some questions. Fernanda has them.
Okay, great.
Okay. So, Noemi, how can students develop fluency and variety to achieve all this?
Well, I believe that by the incorporation of systemic functional grammar in the course of studies, if you incorporate another, if you teach systemic functional grammar and you train your students in the analysis of texts by using the resources of systemic functional grammar, you create an awareness in students as regards language that is not created by a traditional grammar. So incorporating this grammar, performing analysis, using authentic texts are what are going to help students perform better at writing. And I'm using systemic functional grammar in my courses, and systemic functional grammar together with essay writing. And I hope that we can ask my students, but we see systemic functional grammar and we start with essay writing in the 3rd year, and probably there they still have difficulties. But what I notice is that in the 4th year, they have developed an awareness at writing, at language, that helps them a lot, even in the peer correction, because we use a lot of peer correction. And I notice sometimes that they are speaking with theoretical background, and they are speaking like me. So that would be a way. I don't know if the question, if there is any other doubt as regards this.
No, that's okay. That's okay. And then,
good.
How does interpersonal meaning differ from interpersonal metafunction?
Interpersonal meaning is part of the interpersonal metafunction. Because the interpersonal metafunction is one of the metafunctions, one of the functions that language is meant to perform. Yes. Again, Halliday always focused on the function that language is meant to perform and to help people communicate. So we convey interpersonal meaning when we are communicating by using the resources of the interpersonal metafunction. Yes, but well, it is not, the interpersonal meaning is something in the abstract, because there is not something that is exactly the interpersonal meaning. Yes, it is one of the metafunctions, and there are many resources there. Yes, but I suppose that the person who asked the question meant that the resources that we use from the interpersonal metafunction, that is to say, the use of modals, appraisal theory, the use of, for example, indicative, imperative. Okay, if one thing is to ask, to demand a service politely by means of a question, and another thing is to demand a service by means of an imperative. There, the roles change. Of course, we have to take into account that how the speaker positions himself, because if you are in a position of authority and you want to exert that authority, you are going to use the imperative. Yes, I don't know if that was what they meant by interpersonal meaning.
I think so. I have a question, and that is me.
Okay.
Is there going to be something more about it? Because it was so short and we want you to expand. So Are there going to be more talks
Okay.
about it?
We are planned next year. It's going to be 20 years old, and we are planning to do some series of talks, workshops, conferences. We are thinking about it, but yes, the idea is to go on with the topic.
Please do a workshop about it.
I was thinking about it. Yeah. Could be. The point is that, well, this year is special, and in a workshop, I prefer for a workshop to have the interaction with the people. Yes, because I would like to do a workshop on writing by using systemic functional grammar, and also to give tools to teachers to correct, because that is another area in which teachers are having lots of difficulties. We no longer correct grammar. I mean, we correct grammar when we correct texts, but we should be correcting differently. Sometimes grammar what we say, teachers, grammar mistakes are not so important, but sometimes when they prevent communication and when people do not understand what is being written, I mean, what has been written, they are serious, yes? But we can also have something like that for next year, I suppose, because this year is coming to an end soon. It has gone by so quickly with all the new technological devices that we have to use to change our way of teaching, our way of communicating with our students. It has been really hard and exhausting.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much for your talk. So
I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, we have.
Okay.
On behalf of APIB, we want to thank you for being here, giving this talk and sharing with us this approach to systemic functional grammar.
Yes, I was going to say the same.
Thank you for the invitation also.
Sorry for the interruption, Noemí. Sorry, what did you say?
I was going to say the same. Thank you for inviting me, and you, Carmen, thank you for forcing me.
I did, didn't I? Okay.
Thank you for being
here. Thank you all, guys, really. It's been a great pleasure. And it's true that this was a very short limit, a very short time that we had, to develop such a great area of interest to teachers and students alike. So we want to thank you all participants for being here. Thank you, Noemí. Thank you, APIB. On behalf of APIB and our staff at Instituto Superior Avanza, we say thank you again. And we hope to see you again next year when we organize our, probably, as Noemí said, workshops when our profesorado turns 20 years old. So it'll be our anniversary next year, and we will be celebrating this with your workshops, Noemí. What do you think?
Okay, you're going to force me to do it. All right. No, force me not, persuade. Let's use the language appropriately. Persuade me into doing it.
Yeah. Yes, I will persuade you. Yes. And APIB will persuade me, probably.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Let's hope that we can be together next year. Thank you.
Thank
Bye, people. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Bye, and thank you.